Brian Fuhrer is the Senior VP of Product Strategy and Thought Leadership for Nielsen Global Media, a leading provider of information and analytics. In his role, he works closely with clients to design and guide product enhancements to reflect evolving consumer media consumption and technology adoption. In addition, he spends a considerable amount of his time analyzing and presenting data to help demystify audience trends and developing insights. Brian's expertise stems from 30 plus years in media research and product development at Nielsen. His experience spans both the US advertising industry and overseas markets, where Nielsen has a media presence in over 30 countries. And I know Amy and I talked about having Brian speak before, or someone from Nielsen, and of course, Brian's a perfect fit, kind of about what's going on and what you're seeing. And I think Brian's going to talk about kind of social media, and if your stream works, the dream works, which I think, I got to imagine that's an ever-changing target. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Doug. So a couple of things. One of the, this past year has just been, everybody thinks about all the bad things, and it has been a horrible year from many perspectives. But from a media perspective, it's been, and from a Nielsen perspective in particular, it's been just extraordinary. And I just wanted to kind of walk you through some of the things that we've seen. I do have some slides, but it says that participant screen sharing is disabled by the host. Can you let me?
Nope, I just turned you on.
Okay, let's see if I can. All right, let's see. Just bear with me. Everyone is a little bit different, so.
Oh,
Here you go.
Can you see something? Okay, good.
Yep.
Give this a load. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of, just so I don't bore you, I'm gonna kind of clip through these pretty quickly. But I did a keynote at the Consumer Electronics Show this 2 weeks ago, and it was kind of encapsulated a lot of different views of what's happening. The three kind of things, the three components, I think, or how traditional TV and streaming fit together, that because a lot of people really don't understand the sizing, because if you read the press, you think only thing that happens now is people watch Netflix. That's the only thing and I'll show you kind of the how the relationship is. Some of the technology that we rolled out in the past 8 or 9 months at Nielsen, and how we're using that to measure streaming. And then, some fun is kind of what 2020 looked like from a streaming perspective. So one of the most interesting things in my career, I really remember it so distinctly, is early on I visited our friends at CNN, and they had in one of their Techwood campus, and one of their big conference rooms, all around the room was a timeline. And what you realize is, news events and timing and ratings all kind of coincide, and they had their ratings graph measured against key things that happened. And I used that format to look back at what happened kind of in 2020, with kind of the dual heartbeats of our culture being sports and news. Right, and as you look back into February, and sports just died. Then we had, the draft, that was a big event because it was the first thing that we could watch. And you can see gradually events came back until we hit the NCAA and we hit NFL. Those weekends are when sports really came back. Conversely, at the same time, we had the news events. And what was amazing to me is, if you look at 2020, and there's kind of three things between the election, the racial events, COVID, and sports, any of those things would have been, the biggest event of, the past decade, and they all happen in one year. And from a media perspective, when you combine what happened in streaming, more happened with our clients in streaming in 2020 than really in the past decade. So it was so much happened, and we had so much work to do to give our clients insights, onto what really what happened. So here's a look back at a snippet of the year. And sorry about the horrible Pepto-Bismol color, but this is total usage. So at Nielsen, we measure everything that happens on TV. If the TV is on, we're measuring it. And for those of you that, get in the weeds a little bit, we've got about 48,000 homes across the U.S. that contribute to our national television information, and that's where this is based. So you can see the blips are the weekends. Every weekend, people watch TV more. But what people don't really understand is this blue section is what percentage of TV use is linear TV, and it's about 75%. So it's much greater than people would perceive. Because the press is all around streaming. Although it's important to understand that if you rewind, 8 to 10 years, this pink component really didn't even exist. Because this is primarily streaming, and then so the purple component here is SVOD and AVOD. So the actual streaming component. And then this other layer that I'm going to talk about a little bit more is linear streaming. This is the biggest area of increase that we're watching on, in TV and streaming, is people just watching linear TV, but through a streaming app. And that's Sling and, all of these different, even your Spectrum app and things like that. So there's a lot of different things in here that contribute to that. So, okay, we got our friend Will.
Oh, let me in. Yeah.
Okay.
Did he get in?
Yeah, I think so. Now we're on to streaming. So we're at about a quarter of television usage is streaming, and it's actually it was greater in some months of 2020. But when in December, if you can recall, that's when sports really came back in earnest. So it actually went down a little bit from an overall share perspective, but still it's been increasing very steadily month over month. But the biggest change that happened during the stay-at-home period is a lot of people streamed. Everybody knows that, and we really, if you think about the period that changed behavior, it's St. Patrick's Day to Easter Sunday of 2020. That's the time that everybody was staying home. There was no sports. People were looking for things. And the people that were streaming before streamed more. But what really changed was there's particularly older demographics that were not able to stream. They figured out a way to connect their TV, to get credentials, to test these different streaming components. And that's the big change that we saw in 2020. Streaming went from a young person's kind of activity to much more older people who, for those of you that, are involved in television, older people watch the overwhelming majority of television. So when they start to stream, that's when you're going to see behavior shift a lot. And that's what we're seeing really in the shift, and particularly in, after the stay-at-home period. The big change was after the stay-at-home period, people went, back to kind of pre-COVID levels of media consumption, but older demographics stayed right at their peaks, and they kept on streaming. So that was a big change in our world. Just a couple of quick definitions. I'm going to take you through a few categories. These can be debated. There's a lot of ways to categorize different apps and things like that. But the way that we categorize them is SVOD is a video streaming service that you have to pay for, requires a subscription. AVOD is free streaming services that have ads, and then MVPDs or vMVPDs. It's just an internal kind of industry term for live television that's streamed, and that's watching your Spectrum app or watching Sling TV or these different types of services. AVOD is really an area that's exploding, and another way to think of it is FAST, free ad-supported TV. So if you've explored any of these services, it's Tubi, Pluto, the Roku channel. Those are the more well-known ones. And if we break down streaming a little bit more, you can see SVOD is by far the biggest, but AVOD, which includes YouTube, is really picking up. And from a standpoint of year-over-year share growth, linear streaming is the one that's really picking up a lot more. And again, just taking you through really quickly, the biggest insight here is when we first started tracking streaming, Netflix was more than half of the streaming universe. Now, for the first time, they're underneath 30%. So less than a third, a lot of other entrants. But the important thing to keep in mind is, even though shares decreasing, their absolute volume, their volume of streaming continues to increase. So it really is an amazing time to be a consumer, because there's just more and more products to be able to consume. One of the reasons that I'm going to talk about AVOD a little bit more. Older demographics seem, a lot more price sensitive, number one, and number two, a lot less advertising sensitive. So, if you're like me, the way God intended television to be is it's supposed to have ads on it, right? So, when older demographics go in and they look at a Tubi or a Pluto TV, things like that, and there's ads on it, it's not that jarring. But for somebody that grew up, in the Netflix generation, ads are very unusual. So they're a little bit more sensitive. And a lot of cases, they're using their parents' money to buy their subscriptions anyway. So they're not as price sensitive. So this is just a quick snapshot to look at the average audiences, or the audience age to these different services. And you can see when you look at the US estimate across demographics, you can see it looks a lot more like streaming than linear television does. 58% of linear television is, are older demographics. And you can, as you look across, Disney Plus is obviously the youngest demo skew, because, they've got a lot of kids content. And then Hulu, I'm sorry, YouTube always comes in next. So there's a lot of layers in there, and those are the two that we see. What's really interesting, we don't have the AVOD players broken out here, but they skew a lot older, and that's a relatively new phenomenon. And in fact, they get kind of testy with us when we started sharing the data, because they said, no, we're much younger. And then we showed them the data, and what happened is, it seems like, as we went through the stay-at-home period, a lot of older demos that came in and figured out how to stream on their TV. They're like, hey, wait a second, this is free. I don't have to pay for it. And there's a lot of content out there. So that's what seems to be getting a lot of pickup with older demos. So looking at cross streaming, as you might expect, SVOD is about 55, the lion's share. AVOD, which includes YouTube here, is the second. But when we take out the big five, and that's Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, YouTube, and Disney Plus, the picture changes a lot. And this is one of the most surprising things that we saw when we look back at the year. Linear TV is actually gaining a lot and is the largest group of streaming. We think a lot of this was driven by the fact that Spectrum in particular was very aggressive in price gives back. So if you're
locked up.
You're locked up, Brian.
you had a set-top box, let's see what's happening here.
Yeah, no,
Now we can hear you.
Now you can hear me? Okay. My wife must be watching something, so I'll have to tell her get off the internet.
I'm going to tell Renee
Okay.
you said that.
Yeah. Don't get me in trouble. So anyway, I'll keep the other business that we've really gotten into this year is something called TVOD. And for those of you that notice those new offerings, if you have Amazon or different services, you notice there's always been, or for the past 5 years or so, a lot of $4.99, $5. I'm locked up again?
no, you're good.
Okay, sorry. But now you can watch theatrical releases for about $19.99, and in some cases a little bit more than that. This is to get around the fact that the movie theaters are shut down. So we're able to work with our studio clients and measure this directly. So this has been a really interesting thing that we've done, and being able to deliver content or audiences based on this new outlet. So real quickly, people have said to me, what's, define success for a streaming service? And I said, it's a lot like a track team when you think about it, because, track teams, for those of you that participate in track teams, is really different events and different people, but they all need to contribute to succeed. And on a track team, the one, the runners are the heart of any track team, but there's two very different kinds of runners. The originals are the sprinters. They're the ones that everybody knows about. It's the Stranger Things. It's the Bridgerton. It's the ones that people get a really high profile that bring people in, but they consume them very, very quickly. And conversely, the distance runners are the original content. And that's The Office and Grey's Anatomy, the ones that have, 400, 300 episodes, that once people start watching them, they can keep going for a long, long time. And these, creating the balance of these two really is what's required for a successful streaming service. And then, the other events, the interface, you got to be able to find the content. So the interface has to be nice and usable, user-friendly. And distribution is really important. We work with our clients in figuring out what devices they're available on. So, for example, we're doing a deep dive with Apple TV Plus this week because they made a big deal with all of the game consoles in November. And we're going to show them how, what their audiences changed as a result of now being available on Xbox and PlayStation and these other devices. And then the key thing really that's where it's all coming together is value, because, depending on what the price is, does it have ads? Does it, and what is the content? That's, the bottom right is really where all this is coming together. And these are the dials that everybody's adjusting to figure out what success is. And that's why it's so interesting to be in this business, because everybody's changing everything at the same time. And the last thing, for those of you Star Wars fans, if you're like me, every Friday night you look forward to a new episode, for a couple of months of The Mandalorian. Well, they did something very different and very smart, because Cobra Kai was a huge hit for Netflix and our friends at Sony who created the content. But what they did was they released the entire season at once, and people go in and binge, and they burn through all those episodes at once. Conversely, and that was on Netflix, on Disney Plus, what they did was they did it like traditional TV. They said, we're going to release one episode a week, and every week they got about 1 billion viewing minutes to the various episodes. And that's a big deal, because once they get people into the app, then they can cross promote and show them other things that are there. So that's one of the ways that Disney Plus really made such a big success this past fall, by getting every ounce of value they could out of each Mandalorian episode. And they needed to, because they spent an unbelievable amount of money on that one series. The joke in Hollywood was they had an unlimited budget and they exceeded it. So that's it was quite an extraordinary program. So just a quick look back to 2020. What happened there? I'm going to break this down. This is total viewing across the year in 3 categories: originals, acquired, and movies. So originals, Ozark and Tiger King are the 2 I'll point out here, because they really released right at that. I talked about that stay-at-home period. And as we look at streaming, 1 billion viewing minutes a week is a big hit. We've had some 2 billion minutes and an occasional 3 billion minute a week program, but generally 1 billion minutes was really what 1 billion viewing minutes is really what indicated a win. Ozark and Tiger King both released during the stay-at-home period, and they each had a 5 billion viewing minute week. And that's because people were desperate to find something to watch. And I'm almost ashamed to say that they watched Tiger King, even though it's kind of a locally based program. So these were the big winners across the year, all Netflix titles, with the exception of The Mandalorian that I mentioned. Now, what's really interesting is when you look at movies, because even though Disney Plus is a much smaller distributor than Netflix, they really, 7 out of 10 top movie titles for 2020 were Disney Plus titles. And the reason is kids watch content very differently than adults. For those of you that have kids at home, the number of times a kid will watch Moana or Frozen, the exact number is infinite. They will watch, it doesn't matter. They will watch it over and over and over and over. And that's what creates the value. And that's what's going to drive a lot of content creation this year, because they know it's really, really important to these streaming services to have that kids' content. Because once the kids are there, once they're subscribing, and once you're in there, then other content can be cross-promoted. And that's really, this is one of the biggest findings, I think, in the past year. And then, for those of you that are Office fans, The Office concluded on Netflix in 2020 and moved over to Peacock, but it was by almost 60 billion viewing minutes on the TV alone. So it's just, it's quite extraordinary what that franchise did. And one of the, there's two reasons we attribute to. One is the fact that it's almost like a video meme where similar like kids content, people can watch The Office over and over again because they're comfortable with it and they like the jokes. And it's not like, a reality TV program where once you figure out who married who or whatever, it's done. You enjoy going back, kind of the old Cheers thing where everybody knows your name. There's that comfort factor. And the comfort factor really drives the second thing. They were looking for escape. So really wanted to get away from all the things that we're dealing with, whether it's politics or COVID. The Office was a place that they went to. And, as we look back at the deep dive, over 100,000 years of The Office was streamed in 2020, in the US. It's quite extraordinary. If we took that 100,000 years and did it for something, for a good cause, it would be quite extraordinary. But you can see it's really amazing. But the single most eye-opening thing as we look back on 2020, we talk about the amazing amount of Office that was streamed on Netflix. More of The Office was actually watched on linear television than it was on streaming. And that this was a real eye-opener. And that's really promising for NBCU as they launch it on Peacock, because what it indicates is there's still, a big audience for this franchise. So it's really interesting as we dug through it. So, streaming continues to grow, not a surprise. Kids movies and episodic releases, how they're going to do that are going to be key moving into 2021. We talk about the older demos coming in during the stay-at-home period. And the one thing we know for sure is nobody has all the answers. And that's why we like working so closely with our clients, because every day it's a new data set with new clues to answer the mystery of how to succeed. And that's really where we've been focused. In fact, Friday was a really big day for us because we're working really closely with HBO Max. And if you notice, we didn't release any HBO Max titles for 2020. And one of the things, and every week we release the SVOD top 10. If you look, if you're interested, we put it on Nielsen.com every week with a little bit of commentary. We say, what won the week, and it's more entertainment and research, but it generates a lot of discussion. And as I was looking at it, right now we're looking across Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and Disney Plus. One of the things I noticed was Wonder Woman, which is not released now, in the week that it was released, Wonder Woman 84 actually won the week. So we got in touch with our friends over at Warner and said, you might want to consider releasing this because it's a big deal. And we did on Friday, and the press response was really, really interesting. And everything from, Gal Gadot, the star of Wonder Woman, tweeted, the Nielsen numbers, which was, pretty thrilling to me. And then, and also, the other end of the spectrum, a pretty big story was carried in the Wall Street Journal. So this is kind of where everything comes together, where we're trying to help our clients get their stories out there. And also, it obviously puts Nielsen on the map when there's that much press around it. So anyway, I told Amy I really didn't want to bore you guys with too much inside baseball, but that's kind of the update on streaming. Hopefully some of it resonated a little bit with you and you found it interesting, but we're trying to just some examples of what your neighbors down on Nielsen Way are up to, and that the universe just keeps kind of expanding with in this world, and we think 2021 is going to be much better, we hope, for all of us than 2020.
Thanks, Brian. And I mean, I nerd out on this stuff, obviously being in the media for 30 years. Are people finding, or NBC/Peacock, are they finding that by switching over to the subscription-based business that they are replacing the revenue that they were generating through traditional TV shows with commercials? I mean, is it balancing out? I don't know that it seems like it is, because so many people are trying to avoid, the traditional commercials for subscription, and you're sharing it with your brothers and your sisters, and are they replacing the revenue?
The answer is not even close yet, but they will. when I talked about the success of a streaming service, it's all around that, value proposition. I'm very bullish. A lot of people are saying, oh, people won't pay for more than 3 subscription services. I think that's nonsense. I think it's almost unlimited what people will pay. The difference is you have to make it easy. And there's 2 things, Doug, that are happening that are really driving this. One is figuring out what the right subscription price model is, and figuring out how to really capitalize on digital advertising. So those are the 2 things that are happening. The one thing I know is, these companies have said we are now streaming first companies, and they're fully vested, and they're going to figure out how to make it work. HBO Max is the perfect example. One of the biggest announcements of the year was when or I should say Warner Brothers, said we're taking all of our theatrical titles and we're putting them on HBO Max for the first 30 days. That was, a multi-billion-dollar decision. And they're betting on HBO Max. And I think Peacock is still figuring out where all the dials fit, but by pulling the Office franchise back and the billions in revenue they made from Netflix and putting it on their service, I think that's a perfect example of what one of the bets is. So, to answer your question very quickly, they haven't yet, but I know they will.
And to that point, I always struggled when I worked for iHeartRadio, that we were, as a terrestrial radio station, US 103.5, we were so heavily cross-promoting iHeartRadio, which is kind of a free/subscription base. So and I kind of look at maybe NBC and then the Peacock as kind of battling against each other. Is Peacock taking traditional TV viewers away from the NBC channel, kind of like iHeart was taking away from the terrestrial radio station? I mean, they're kind of stealing their own audience, and I don't know how that model works out and how it plays out, so that you continue to make money on both of them. But I always argued with my program directors, it's like, why are we sending people? We make our revenue through ads on terrestrial radio, but we're sending people and telling them, no, go listen to this free thing with no commercials. And, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. And I see some of the TV products kind of doing the same thing. Is that kind of what's going on? I mean, I watch Dan Patrick on Peacock every morning,
Yeah.
And slowly but surely it's sticking ads in, but.
Well, what's happening is, let's start with this point. I think their idea is, I'd rather have them watch it on Peacock than on Netflix or Amazon or something else. That's the first point. And the second is, they're still within kind of the Comcast universe. So the ability to promote back and forth and all of that's the relationship I think they're all really going for. And the ability, because the big thing is for Peacock, and it's Peacock was definitely the most unlucky of the services, because the big launch of Peacock was the Olympics. And when the Olympics canceled, that's what was going to really drive their subscription and put them on the map. And so they're struggling a bit. They're coming up with some interesting, SNL kind of reunions and Friends Office reunions, things like that. But I think they're kind of biding their time until the big guns really hit. And we'll see what happens in Tokyo.
Anybody else? I could talk to you all day, but any other questions? Because of course I'd like to know what Nielsen is going to be looking at. There's some football game happening Sunday that I've heard of. So I mean, compare this year's Super Bowl pandemic and streaming media to the way it was 10 years ago. Are we still seeing the astronomical ad rates that we're seeing? And what are you guys going to be measuring this weekend?
Yeah. So. I'm going to pause you for 1 second, Doug, and come back to Felicia. I know Felicia had a question, so let me get another one in there. I'll come back to yours.
Actually, it wasn't a question. It's just incredibly fascinating to me, to watch an acceleration of a trend that was already there, and then what a pandemic or the evolution of how we view things really accelerated during this pandemic time, but it's here to stay. And I just think I'm really fascinated by the data. So thank you so much for giving that presentation.
No,
It's
believe me,
astonishing.
I give it when nobody's even here. My wife's tired of listening to it. I was so happy to get this meeting with you guys. And Amy's laughing because she knows I'm serious. But yeah, what we see every year, and at Christmas time, we call it the enablement period, the holiday enablement period. It's always a big deal for us to make sure that, because people get new sets, they get new services, they get new devices, and we have to catch up. Well, when you look at the stay-at-home period, it was like 5 years of a holiday recovery period in kind of a 6-week period, and it changed our business and the media landscape forever, because that's what really, the adoption period really changed quickly. But coming back to your question, Doug, it's pretty phenomenal. As we looked at sports this year, people were so starved for sports. And, when the NCAA and the NFL came back, they really jumped in, with both feet to watch. But it didn't really, the levels weren't as high as a lot of people expected. And my theory on that is, when you watch live sports in an empty stadium, it just doesn't have the electricity. It just doesn't. It's almost like it's a little bit synthetic. It's like what we're confronting here in Tampa with these 3 huge events, between the Stanley Cup and the World Series and the Super Bowl in largely empty stadium. It's there's something synthetic about it that just isn't as. It's great, and I'm not complaining. It's great the Bucks made it, but man, wouldn't it be different if everything was overflowing? And I think that's part of the enjoyment of sports that people are lacking a little bit with watching it on TV. It's almost like it's an exhibition game. There's a certain amount that has to do with that. But from the standpoint, it's going to be the biggest television event of the year by far. I mean, there's not going to be anything this year that's going to come close to the Super Bowl for a lot of reasons. And I think it's extra lucky that we have the Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes kind of storyline that's developed. But when there's great ratings on the Super Bowl, it's good for business. It's good for our business, good for our clients' business. And it's big things like that are always going to be tentpole events that are going to drive linear TV, because what do they use the Super Bowl for? Largely, it's generally a losing proposition, but they do make money on the ads. But where they really make the money or the opportunity is to cross promote their other content, because they do 2 things. With the ads, you'll see promotions for other programs on that network. And generally what they do is, immediately after the Super Bowl, they'll premiere a new program that they're really trying to promote. So there's really deep roots in these content in these events that you don't notice, because everybody focuses on the ads, and which isn't a bad thing, because the ads are generally the most fun part of the game. But it's interesting when you look at the kind of the whole situation in its entirety.
Brian,
So,
go ahead, Felicia.
So Brian, it came to my mind about a couple years ago, I was introduced to a vendor called Magic Leap, and they do augmented reality, and they were partnering with the NBA so that they could offer you an augmented experience at sports. Is that something that I guess that you guys eventually, if we lead that way into offering that kind of user experience, like, wouldn't that be cool now with the Super Bowl, if you could buy a ticket through augmented reality and pretend that you're there? And
yeah,
so
I mean,
I wonder what that world's going to do for you all to be able to measure that through, because I guess you got to have an app to do that. So I'm assuming it would be relatively easy.
No, as technology, gets more advanced, it gets more advanced more quickly. And
Right.
A lot of things have to come together. And, we have our fingers in a lot of different pies on engagement and other different things. The funny thing is, nothing really has resonated as much as just really understanding the audience and everything about the audience. But if you think of all the augmented reality, and I think that's the key more than artificial reality. Augmented reality is what's really amazing, and being able to just get a lot more. I haven't seen, with everything that happens, I think people have been working hard to try and get Zoom and Google Hangouts to work over the past year more than the reality stuff. But I think you're right. There's, the sky's the limit on those types of capabilities. It's going to be really interesting to see what comes up next.
Yeah, I myself am excited about all of that. Just the thought of being able to avatar into a meeting and in my business, share plans and talk about that in a space is pretty exciting.
No, just being able to present, even to stand up and walk, or this is really hard for me, because Amy will tell you, when I talk, I usually wear my shoes out from pacing back and forth and moving around the room, and this is no fun.
Agreed.
Hey, Brian, Chuck and I were talking before the call started about, like, for instance, I heard their Clearwater Gas's ad on, the local sports station. It's probably a slow decrease, but with all this bifurcation of, our local media, that people are going to, all these different types of streams, how do you, from an economic standpoint, how does our local businesses continue to be able to reach their audiences if everybody is going to, all these various streaming things, and nobody's really watching, quote, the local TV for them to get their message out? Do you see that being a non-issue or a slow depletion of that audience?
Well, let me preface this with saying this isn't my sweet spot, but that's certainly never prevented me from commenting before. So what I believe is a couple things are happening, and if you go to the Spectrum app, they do a really good job with Bay News 9 and getting that type of content out there. And I don't see, I think what's going to happen is the future is moving towards aggregation. And what I mean by that is nobody's going to be able to deal with 100 apps, and every time you want a different program, I got to go from the Disney Plus app to the Discovery Plus app to the Netflix. It's too confusing. So what's going to happen is, I think we're going to aggregate back to where it looks a lot like channel surfing again, but you'll have a nice menu. And the two companies that I think are winning in that space are Amazon. If you have Amazon Prime Video, you can see they're trying really hard to offer you a lot of different content through one view. And the other one, though, is at the other end of the spectrum is Xfinity. Xfinity's trying, a number of years ago, they said there's no way, no how we're ever going to allow Netflix into our ecosystem. Now it's a button on their remote control, right? So it's changed dramatically. What they realize is the way to win audiences back is help them to navigate and give them content that they want, all within one menu. Now, the reason I point that out is these companies also realize the value of locally resonant news and ads and content. So, because what you see is a national ad is very expensive to sell, as you well know. And that's why when you see content and it's got some national ads and some local ads, it's because generally they can't sell out all the national ads. But you can, when you break down the finances of it, you can sell a lot of local ads in a lot of local markets for a lower CPM, but at just breaking it down technically. And I think it's actually going to work the opposite of what people believe, that, getting back to Felicia's point about technology, I think the hyper targetability of local ads or of the technology of addressable is going to really help a lot more on that side. Because my prediction is everybody's talking about addressable is, I'll be able to, we'll be able to reach all those Mercedes-Benz, buyers. Well, the point is there's only so many Mercedes-Benz buyers, But when you look across, and suddenly everybody over a certain income, is going to be flooded, and then the other 99%, they're going to need ads. That's where I think local is going to come into play here, and I think there's a big opportunity because it makes a lot more sense. And I think the finances, when the addressable nature of television gets broader and broader, I think that's where local is going to come back into play.
Yeah, awesome. Well, and I think with all of it, you can dig down so deep and target your exact audience, through your cable services. And if you want to reach a certain demographic, they know how to do that, as opposed to running one ad that goes to people that don't really care about your product or will never buy it. You can pinpoint, who you want to reach. So I think that's probably where things are going to go, is to really dig down and hit your audience.
Yeah, to Felicia's earlier point, I think the whole, the ad tech component of what of what's happening in television is the biggest gap, right? If you go to a lot of the traditional VOD stuff that you have, it runs the same pre-roll, mid-roll, and people hate those ads. But being able to really control in frequency and reach people with that critical Clearwater Gas ad, that's kind of where we need to get. By the way, I'm a Clearwater Gas client, customer, so I appreciate it.
And we love this cold weather.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Not so much the chamber, but it works for us.
Yeah. Any other questions in the room? Amy, what's going on your end of Nielsen?
Well, I was actually going to selfishly ask Brian a question, so he can, with his expert advice, give me how I would explain the answer to this. But recently, Brian, I was checking out the Office segments that they have on YouTube. And so, since The Office is really one of your sweet spots, since you use that term, you kind of know everything about Jim and, all of the folks there on the show. The fact that I can watch so much content on YouTube, and I think you categorize that as the ad-supported VOD. Is that
AVOD? Yeah.
AVOD.
Because it has ads, and it's free.
Sure. And it's free. So I, kind of got into I was doing some work, and I just had the YouTube. It just keeps coming up, right? So it let me watch content, Office clips after Office clips. How would that be actually calculated in the big scheme of things when it comes to The Office?
Well, there's a couple of different components there. One, the question of how can they have a business model where they have the clips on YouTube and then it's on Comedy Central and then it's also on Peacock? Well, the interesting thing is when you put the Venn diagram together, there's not as much overlap as you might think of viewers, and the idea, the big idea on the YouTube stuff is, even though they're making money off of the ads, it promotes people to go and watch the full length episodes. So that's the idea there. And when you've heard about Nielsen 1 and how we're going to do that, we've had a product that we've put together over the past 5 years called Total Content Ratings. And what that allows us to do is put it together an episode for The Office, regardless of if it had ads, no ads, whatever it is, and if it was a clip or if it was a full length, and show what the total audience was to that piece of content. And that's interesting, but it's not critical, because what it doesn't tell you is who saw the ad and in each of those, because it really is exclusive of ads. The big initiative that we're working on now is something called Nielsen 1, where we can take the ad across all of these platforms and put them together. And that's where, we think that's going to be one of the keys to unlocking the value of digital in a way that people have been able to capitalize on traditional TV. And actually, the biggest change there is on traditional TV, because, in the digital world, we measure second by second, and, we credit it that way. On On traditional TV, it's average minute type audiences, and it's much more average together as opposed to exact seconds. So we've got a lot of work to do in traditional TV, but once we get there, then we'll be able to put it all together, and that's how you'll be able to include your clip in, episode 6 of season 7 of The Office, that ad in there with the one that's airing on Comedy Central with the one that's airing on Peacock. Much more information I'm sure you're interested in, but anyway, that's a little bit of background. Sorry, folks, I get carried away.
No, and the last thing I was going to say is Brian has a pretty cool story. He has a lot of great stories, but one of my favorites.
They're much better with alcohol, but anyway, the coffee is not as good.
We can't provide that today, but just briefly, you had a great Super Bowl experience a few years back with a gentleman that worked for CBS for decades, and the actual power that he wielded over the entire, game itself with the power of research. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite clients, if not my favorite client ever, Dave Poltrak, who some of you may have met because we actually had. I think it was 2 years ago when we had Dave Poltrak Day. He came down and I think Eric signed the proclamation. It was terrific. It really worked out super well. But Dave Poltrak was in charge of programming and research at CBS for 50 years. 50 years. He had 50 years. He wasn't at that title for 50 years, but when he retired, he was. So anyway, we were in Houston. It was a Patriots Super Bowl in Houston. I happened to be sitting next to him, and he was like a hero of mine. So I was kind of awestruck that I'm sitting next to Dave Poltrak at the Super Bowl. I'm like Bruce, what's his name, was sitting back at me just stars all around. I'm sitting next to Dave Poltrak, and Dave's he keeps going like this. And finally, I was like, Dave, what are you looking at? And he said, I'm trying to decide whether to close the roof. And I was like, wow, this guy's got some juice, So anyway, because he was trying to figure out how much the cloud cover was going to affect, the cameras and everything. So I said, okay, that was one of my favorite. Bruce Willis, that's the name. I was sitting in front of Bruce Willis next to Dave Poltrak, so I thought I was a big shooter that day. But I didn't get a ticket this year. You going, Amy? You have a ticket?
Just to that Super Bowl experience, I already told you that's about the extent of it. It'll be right here in my backyard.
I think I'm going to stay home and invite 2 friends over and socially distance out in the garage and watch it on the TV there. So
it'll be outdoor viewing.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I really appreciate it. And Amy, I appreciate, as always, Nielsen and your great partnership with the city and the chamber. And in listening to all this, Brian, it sounds like more than ever, the media outlets and the advertising markets are going to need Nielsen more than ever to navigate through this ever-changing, world of social media and streaming video and things like that. Do you see that to be the case?
That's what I keep telling them anyhow. So hopefully it'll have the added benefit of being true. So we'll see. No, we have great relationships, and this will be my 35th year at Nielsen, and a lot of the people that I work with on the client side, I've worked with for 25 years, and so as you know, everything is based on relationships, and as they're trying to figure out, how to help their company navigate through these completely uncharted waters, how to keep their jobs, right? Everybody's worried about all these companies are reorganizing and changing, and we try and keep them as informed as we can with the existing data that we have, and also inventing new things that are happening. I didn't mention we have, when we looked at those genres of streaming, that's based on a new device that we've come up with called a streaming meter. And at the beginning of 2020, we had them in about 700 homes across the US. And for those of you that know, we've had to stand down our entire field force through 2020, but we came up with new technology to be able to work with our homes remotely. And we went from 700 homes at the beginning of last year with these new devices to 7,000 by December. So these insights from a streaming perspective, it was actually a huge success story of figuring out how to do things that, under really bad situations, and our clients are really using that data to be able to figure out insights in this new world. So collaborating with them, having them tell us what's important, that's the main thing, and then hopefully we can continue to deliver. But I hope to hopefully I guess it's going to be the 2022 Oldsmar Gala. Maybe we can have that at the GTIC. But we love all of our friends from Oldsmar, and we love the opportunity to chat with you guys, and look forward to doing it in person before too long.
Oh, please, I hope so. Yeah. Well, thank you. If there's no other questions, I appreciate it, and I'll definitely get this posted so that those of our trustee members and others that didn't make it. I actually had some county commissioners that were going to be part of it, but I don't know that they got the updated link. So we'll share that with them, because I think it's interesting. And does Nielsen have a prediction on who's going to win the game this weekend?
No, we always stay. The only winner is going to be the network, as we say every year, the network that broadcasts the Super Bowl. They're the big winners. So.
Thanks. That was politically correct. Well, thank you, and thanks, Amy, and thanks everybody for being on.
All right.
Thank you all. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.